Okay, so, hi everybody.
Hi, Chris.
Jay Baba.
Gee, Baba.
And here's the, okay, this is the last talk of the series of 11 talks. And we're going to just go right through it. We're covering kind of final points that need to be touched on. And there's a general theme to this, but some of it will be a little, if it seems disjointed, don't worry. If there's something you don't follow, don't worry, because it's for the video. People have plenty of time to freeze frames, think about it, and then ask me to explain anything later. But anyway, the subject today is cause, senscaras, the own point, and a new hope for humanity, where the future part of the talks comes in. We're going to be talking about the difference between cause and effect in experience versus the cause of experience. Last week I talked about the fact that I said that really speaking, everything that we are calling cause and effects, every event that we see in the world is really effects. It's a series of effects because the real cause is the will. However, Raman brought up a really good point, which I meant to convey, but I don't think I did it well enough. And that is that still, we're in illusion, and there is cause and effect, and we have to be aware of it. So we don't want to teach our children it's all just effects. We need to teach them to look both ways before they cross the street.
Right.
Okay, so I'm going to try and explain this difference pretty carefully without spending too long, because there's a lot of material to cover. So when we normally speak of cause and effect, we are actually speaking of what are called constant conjunctions. So, for instance, I've said many times throughout this that there's a constant conjunction. That means you'll find it every time. Whenever you see me drop this rock, you'll also, in conjunction, see it fall. That's what we call the law of gravity. It's really a conjunction of two effects in experience. And if I drop this ball on this head here, the conjunction, we call either my dropping it or the rock falling the cause. But we see there, it's really the conjunction of two events. So we say the letting go of the rock is the cause of it falling. Hence, my accidentally dropping the rock is the cause of man's accidental death. These causes, in this sense, are events in experience. In this common sense of the word cause, if we were taking these dominoes and someone pushed the first domino, and then it caused this one to fall, and that caused this one to fall, etc. I'm using my shadow to point. We could really say, since we're looking at events, we could call any one of those dominoes the cause of this one beginning to fall. And we could also call the person that pushed the first domino the cause. And then we could also call whatever made him push it the cause, etc. So we're never really going to find the cause like that, because it's going back and back. Okay, so this is the normal, natural way to speak about cause and effect in experience. We point to two regularly conjoined events. Dominoes always do that. Everybody knows that if you push over a domino, because they've seen it happen, it's going to happen that way. These are regularly conjoined events. We point to two regularly conjoined events that we perceive, and we name one of them that is a predecessor of the first, the cause. But having a little trouble here today. Okay. But when we seek the cause of experience, this method of looking for an event will not help us. We will not find the cause of experience in our experience. To think so is to seek the cause in the effect, because we're looking for the cause of experience. So to look for it in experience, we're looking for the cause in the effect. That's why we went over that concept so much before. That's very important. Now, we're going to demonstrate the percept means what you perceive. You can never determine the source of the percept in the percept. And I use a method to show this. I take a pair of sunglasses and I put them on. Have you ever, I have. when wearing sunglasses, and I'm walking around the apartment looking for them, and Megan says, "You've got them on, Dad." So so I'm never going to find, looking out there, the source of the tint that I'm seeing everywhere. Okay? So we have another set of analogies for this problem. To seek the cause of all things, we must seek the cause of experience, because that's what we're talking about under this new idea. To seek the cause of experience in its effects is like a man running with a flashlight to catch up with the source of light. A man wearing the tinted glasses chasing the cause of the tint in the tinted world, or a person chasing his own shadow for the cause of the shadow. So, but let's go and consider, back up, let's consider the regular sense of cause and effect, just to see something. Let's consider for a moment the weaker sense of cause. A body is brought into a morgue. We talked about this a couple talks ago, or last week. The death was caused by heart failure, caused by a bullet, caused by a gun, fired by a hitman, hired by a murderer for hire agency, caused by, on and on. And this goes in so many directions backward, like an octopus. I have the octopus show that there's not just one chain moving backward. You could follow another thing. You could follow the shooting of the way the gun worked. The gun manufacturer driven by profits, driven by. Or the man joined the murder for hire agency because of a traumatic childhood caused by something else, etc. We can rightly cause these strings of causes running backward in time. The world is ordered by laws of cause and effect. Baba says that. Both physical and psychological. That's what they're reducible to. They're reducible to laws. Physical laws governed the gun, psychological laws governed the hitman's choices. So he keeps skipping over, so maybe I should use this. Okay, so now Francis Brabazon, So Francis Brabazon, a quote from Stay With God, said, "Go back from effect to cause until you are compelled to believe." Now, what does Brabazon mean? He doesn't mean just wild goose chase of dominoes. Brabazon is asking us to look for what is ultimately responsible, not merely a preceding event. We now know how to do this from these talks, because we recognize that these events are all occurring in perception, and that they are the result of laws of perception. Now, these laws, which we call physical laws, are back here. These are the laws of perception. Physical laws, like the ones that made the gun fire, and psychological laws, like those that made the hitman respond to his childhood in the way that he did. He's affected by a law by this dynamic. In this most profound sense of cause, we are speaking of the cause of the process that produces our experience, which includes these laws of perception. Okay? All of these are the sense of laws of perception. That is the real responsible event, and it cannot be found in its effect, as just explained with the glasses. This is the sense in which I said last week that these chains of events we call causes and effects within our experience are most truly chains of effects of that one truest cause. If we only look at the conjoined events and experience, we will never find its cause. At best, we'll find laws, but have no way to determine what caused those laws. Okay, these laws of cause and effect that govern, these are the laws, as I said before, that govern experience. But even they are not the ultimate culprit, the ultimate cause for what caused them. That is this, right here, this lens, this first lens. And I said that it was time, but I have to make a caveat to that. It is time, but it is the result of something. Okay. The real culprit is that, which is the first sanskara. Now that's the first time I've used the word sanskara in conjunction with these lenses. But it comes from Baba, which was the original whim, and had to be a whim, for it had no cause. And since it is ultimately responsible, Baba calls it the cause on page, I forget what page, in God Speaks, in the most ultimate sense of that word. Now I just said the first cause was sanskara. I want to show that Baba did say that, but we need to grasp for a moment what we mean by sanskara. Sanskaras, as I understand them, are imprints left on the mind by previous experience that then go on to color all subsequent experience. They are thus analogous to lenses we acquire in experience that then color future experience. This is one of the main analogies. There's so many analogies, but it's one of the main analogies used for sanskaras in infinite intelligence, is the lens. Now here's where I promised that Baba said that this was a sanskara. So the first desire inherent in the first word was the first sanskara. All of these are from infinite intelligence. I'm not going to read them. They just, oh boy, really having a little trouble here. Okay, well, here's the next slide. But none of this negates our use of the word cause, as I said earlier, speaking of conditions and consequences in experience. In day-to-day life, reference to cause and effect is necessary for planning intelligent action. And it is this sense of proximate cause, which means the most immediate cause, that is used in science and how they get their power to create useful gadgets. Okay, and this is the mother teaching her kids to walk, to look both ways. When Baba speaks of the whim as the cause and the illusory universe as its effect in God Speaks, and he uses those those are his quotation marks, he is speaking of the cause of all experience, along with its internal operations of cause and effect. And I give a couple quotes here. Only in the phenomenal world, time and space, is there space, time, or operation of law of cause and effect. Notice he doesn't say the cause of the laws of cause and effect. He says their operation, because their operation is really the sanskaras. I mean, their cause is really the sanskaras. We experience their operation. And then, of course, God is beyond the effect, beyond time and space, beyond all actions. Well, cause and effect doesn't apply. But that's talking about the eye, not a lens. But in the final analysis, the whim is the real cause of the string of effects that culminates in the last domino falling, or any such string of events. Okay, now we're going to get into the meat of this talk, where we're going to change how we've looked at several things in light of this general way of looking at the world. Now, in the past, I spent all those weeks explaining that in the past, from the beginning, people thought in terms of a thing, a magical thing. Occult means hidden, it just means hidden. So occult objects, unseen objects, matter or substratum, or 100 different things, okay, that they came up with as causes. That's called hypostasis. They hypostatize the cause. They make it a thing. But it's in there. They make it up. Okay, they give it a name. They feel that that solves it, but it doesn't really solve it. We spent so much time on that, I don't need to repeat. And we thought of spiritual things in terms of, man, it's just going by itself. It's bad. It's bad. Okay. So some examples that I want to talk about in this new, in this new way of looking at the world, we don't use those entities as causes because they need explaining. Instead, we use a perceptual process, which is psychological. And so all our language about things that we've studied in Baba in the past changes with this. It changes from imagining objects to understand them in psychological terms. And by psychological terms, I mean words like consciousness, perception, apprehending, thinking, realizing, realization. Those are the real underlying words Baba is always using. Like the first instance of something apparently being created is really an appearance of an experience. Okay, it didn't really get created, just the appearance got enacted. Okay, so the Om point was conceived, was a magical thing in space. God we imagined as a hidden person in a magic castle. The soul we thought of as an invisible thing that leaves a corpse at death and enters a fetus, as something that moves through space. We thought sanskaras were tiny occult objects like atoms or germs. And I've heard people talk just like this, okay? Somebody said, well, you know, the sanskaras are in the bodily fluids. And then I thought, well, that's interesting. Wear a condom and you won't get any sanskaras. So here we're going to talk, we're sort of abandoning that, and we're going to look at all of these, and then we're going to go, is what we're going over, okay? This rethinking these realities Baba told us about, and that we've always known some of these, like the soul, God. Okay, first of all, the Om point. The first thing I said, we think of it as an occult point in space. We think of it like the Big Bang. Remember, I explained the Big Bang, why it doesn't work. It has a contradiction. Baba is not describing the Big Bang. Baba's reference to a point in God speaks called the Om point, and in infinite intelligence called the Bindu point, has frequently been misunderstood. It is not a point in space, and I want to be very careful to show why. Rather, it's a point of perspective, a point of view, a vantage point from which the world apparently emerged and emerges and is sustained. Apparently, meaning in perception, but it doesn't actually come out of anything. Okay, that's like seeing it from the wrong end of the podium. It cannot be in space, for it precedes and produces, meaning imagines. It precedes and produces space. Remember, space was this lens as I described it. Now, remember this. I'm looking through this and everything looks kind of rosy to me, okay? But I'm not rosy, okay? This is sort of the way space is, as I said. In this sense, space is a way of seeing spatially. So the idea of God being in space is impossible because of that. So the point from which things emerge can't possibly be in space because it emerges only in appearance. There is no space, but phenomenally there is space. Okay, but fundamentally there is not. But in God's imagination, which is the world, there is. Therefore, it is not the Big Bang Theory. I've had many people think that Baba's talking about the Big Bang Theory. No, he's not. The Big Bang is a mytheme. And I already just talked about what mythemes are. A locus, I said in the title, the Om point is not a locus. A locus is a particular position, point, or place. All of those are spatial terms. It's not a spatial thing at all. It is a point of a point of view, a point of perspective, a perspective point. Now, Baba in Infinite Intelligence reinforces this very strongly, that it's just what I said, by using the analogy of the putli of the eye. Now, putli is the Hindu word for a pupil, literally the pupil of an eye. And and the Bindu point, which in Infinite Intelligence is his word for the Om point, is the putli. Okay? And it is through this point, not from this point, that the world appears to us. Now remember, there really are not, and this is from Baba, but it's strange, there are really not a bunch of souls. There are in a sense, and then there are not. What emerges is consciousness out of the process, and that consciousness is what he calls the soul, the individuality of the consciousness. That's the byproduct of the whole process, or the real point of the whole process. But anyway, but fundamentally, no matter what, at no time does anyone ever see from anywhere else but that original perspective. We all are seeing from here. We only apparently are perceiving from separate vantage points because these are our bodies, okay? And these are our personal sanskars. Okay, you got that? So, if you can do that with your mind, it's actually not that hard. But instead of thinking of the world like you're an observer outside watching God and create the world, which is the old way of thinking, think of it as you're seeing it. It's actually manifesting out of you, but not your individual ego. It's manifesting from the point from which you actually perceive it. The fact that okay, so let's go further. So the universe manifests in appearance from this vantage point. Baba actually says this, but it basically was ignored. Okay, and here's a quote from Baba from the original Infinite Intelligence Notebooks. But as the beginning, infinite seeing is connected with the shadow, and as the sanskaras immediately place the looking glass before his eye and make him see through the looking glass, the universe is manifested. I think it's pretty clear that it's manifesting in appearance. It is not manifesting the way we thought of it before. Now, reincarnation is another area that we have thought of in the old way. We thought of reincarnation as transmigration of the soul. That term is not used by Baba and criticized by Charles Purdom in The God-Man, which Baba approved. Transmigration of the soul, move across space of some little magical thing that's invisible. That's the way we always conceived of it. Oh, it left his body at 2 p.m., the dead body, and now it's going into that fetus. It's 3 months later. That's the way we thought of it. So, sort of traversing time and space. And I said, it can't traverse time and space. The soul is really here. It's not in time and space. So Meher Baba never used the term transmigration of the soul when he spoke of reincarnation. And reincarnation is a very good word. It means exactly what we mean. You take flesh again, but you don't go into the flesh. So the difference is like this. Where is the soul to go? First of all, I repeat, since it is not in space. Cannot. Instead, Baba speaks of identification and disidentification of the soul with the impressions, and through them the body, and through it the world. This repeats with the subtle. It's through the subtle sanskars or impressions that we get we take experience of the subtle body, and through the subtle body, the subtle world. You can't see the gross world without a gross body. You cannot see the subtle world without a subtle body, which are simply the product of impression of those sanskars. Gosh, I guess the computer got hot. All right, now, last week I showed a video of a computer game simulation where you become immersed, and the whole point of it was called Skyrim Immersion, mod number whatever. And you do get immersed. Once you start seeing the world coming at you and you're falling down the hill and then you're getting back up and you look down at your hand, you identify with that experience. That's reincarnation. Now Baba absolutely says this in God Speaks. This identification of the conscious soul with the next form is called the birth of a human being. So nowhere is there any traveling. So we got rid of the hypostasis of the soul. We now understand the soul in psychological terms. It is the emerging consciousness that is happening because of this process. Now this next quote right here is the one I mentioned by Charles Purdom from the God-Man, where he says exactly this. He says, much confusion exists upon this subject. Reincarnation is not the transmigration of souls, which in its crude form is fantasy. Okay. The soul is not a thing that migrates from here to there through space and time. It produces these in perception. This is also, by the way, the solution to that problem that Descartes was trying to solve when he came up with the idea of the pineal gland rocking away like Quasimodo to move the body. The soul could, anyway, he's trying to find a mind-body connection, okay? How could a immaterial thing, but see, he's thinking of it as a thing, a thinking thing, affect a physical thing? So he has that dualism, and he could then, this was part of the mind-body problem. That was, remember I said it was when he tried to solve that the eye of Sauron suddenly was looking at the mind-body problem in about 1640s. Because that's always been a bugaboo. So this is, here it's gone. Baba doesn't have any form of the mind-body problem at all. There are 3 forms and he doesn't have any of them. Okay, I want to talk again about Sanskara. Because as I said, in the past we've thought on this thing. So experience, now how is it, this is a Gestalt slide. It's a typical Gestalt slide. It's supposed to be a fox. However, those lines are not sufficient to give you, really, to be a fox. They suggest a fox, but we immediately get a fox. And I said when we were looking at Gestalt slides, if you had never seen a fox, would you recognize it as a fox? If you'd never seen a rabbit, would you recognize the silhouette as a rabbit? If you'd never seen Jesus, would you recognize Jesus in the snow in that slide? So what's going on with that? The Sanskara, of course, solves that, because you're basically, the experience of the past leaves an imprint, Sanskara, on the eye that conditions how we look upon similar events in the future, which in turn conditions how we judge them, causes our judgments, and thus how we act. If you've heard terrible things about foxes, or you saw a fox eat your sister, you're going to get really scared and run away or kill the fox. And if you have another experience, you get it. So the past impressions determines your actions, which is your karma, actually. Oh, it's turning and forming. Okay, the forms, it also, so here we are in the forms of Plato. If you can remember back that far, it was from like talk 3. Plato had the theory of forms, which are related to, well, we're going to explain forms and Gestalt in this way. The forms, remember he had, okay, so let's start with the first one. There are 2 things that Socrates discusses in the plays of Plato. This is really Plato's philosophy, using Socrates as the protagonist. Socrates had asked Meno's slave, who was uneducated, had no education in geometry, asked him a difficult geometrical problem, and he drew it in the sand, but he explained the problem very well. And it's in a dialogue called Meno. And the slave had the answer. And Socrates like, do you see? Because Socrates believed the teacher doesn't teach, he only awakens what's within. Well, what's within? It's those. See, geometry is among the lenses through which we are forming our illusion all the time. We're sort of born into the world looking for it, actually. Looking for squares, looking for circles, looking for regular sides and all of this. Planes, lines. When we discover them in ourselves, we are like archaeologists excavating the relics of our own perceptual evolution. But note, geometry is within us, but not in us independently of the one. So we're not talking about solipsism, it's all in your mind. This isn't quantum mechanics and New Age, and this is objectivist. So the next one, that picture is Socrates teaching the slave or awakening the slave. It's funny, I said before, Baba says, I've come not to teach, but to awaken. It's right out of Socrates. And then I even showed the quote where Baba says, he only awakens the intuitions of the aspirant. That's the role of the guru, of the master. So the other thing is Plato also had his theory of forms. It was related to the geometry. He felt that the world of forms had all a square and a circle and a triangle. But I said it when I was explaining forms, I said, Plato said, how come we have the concept of cupness? How come I'm able to recognize this as cup and not something else? There must be, so he hypothesized, and in the process hypostatized, made something that's abstract, a real thing. A world, an invisible world somewhere, somehow, filled with cups and saucers that are the perfect one and the ideal. And we remember them from before the fall, and then it went into all that. But here, likewise, we can explain these cups, abstract ideas like cupness that Plato felt we needed in order to recognize particulars. We can see them as individual lenses or impressions we gather from past experience. Now, these are not in the whole, they're in the ones that would come, the individual's impressions. It is because you've seen cups in the past, and it left impression, and those are the impressions. We recognize them, and the same with the bunny rabbit and all the Gestalt stuff and the fox, et cetera, et cetera. So all that becomes sort of no longer mysterious. It all becomes what you'd expect to happen. I want to say that Plato is sometimes called a realist, and this is a special sense of the word realist, because he didn't believe the world was real, but he believed these forms were real objects, and so they were real things. Okay, so he didn't have the thinking like this yet, but that's just interesting. Hence, the forms Plato imagined in an occult world of forms are none other than these lenses, not occult objects, like those particulars from which he got the idea of them, but ways of organizing experience, sanskaras. Okay. Now, I want to give some warnings to the young of the future, because I feel sure that a revolution in thinking is going to come very soon because of Baba. It hasn't happened yet. I think it'll come when we're gone, but it's coming when the world's ready. But I want to give some warnings to those wonderful, not stoned 17-year-old bright young people that find these in a cave, these videos. They're sitting there looking at them on an old iPhone, and they're like, we start a revolution. And I'm gonna say, okay, well, just slow down, because you gotta have about 5 things you gotta look for. Because every young, smart 17-year-old who was high on pot, of course, he did these same mistakes. And I'm saying, don't look for them, don't make them, because they're tempting. You'll find. Okay, the first one is, do not succumb to the worn-out temptation to split the monism of perception or infinite intelligence by adding some convenient entity like energy. I could never talk about this to a young person without them saying, yeah, well, there's perception, but there's also like energy. It's like, well, he's making a dualism. Okay, he's splitting. He's not satisfied with oneness. He's got to have stuff. He wants to add, so he thinks he's helping again. It's what we always did. That's why quantum mechanics is now hundreds of invented things. We always want to come up with something new. Now, energy seems magic, and this is why they do it. By the way, it's not just young people are into quantum mechanics, quantum physics, reading, and then there's also the new age kids. There's always energy. I asked Megan, why is that? She said, well, Dad, the reason is because you can't see electricity. You know, you could run a current from a battery through a wire, and at the other end, a dial would move, but you wouldn't be able to feel or see anything running through the thing. Oh, it's magic. So, however, the reason that it seems magic is because it's the effect of a perceptual schema, not because it is a real occult thing independent of experience. There's been a misunderstanding. There's been a sort of a woo-wooization of energy. Energy is explained in this system, and it doesn't help the system. It destroys it. And I'm going to say why you can't do that. When Baba speaks of drops, ocean, sound, movement, vibrating, because this is what inspired these people. They find in a friend, he wanted to have something else so bad. And so in infinite intelligence, he would like, the vibrating, then there's movement. And he was so excited because it sounded so quantum-like. And then it's so obvious, so I've actually listed them here. They're all metaphors. And those words and parentheses are in the book, in the original, not in Ward's book, that's all fixed, but in the original Infinite Intelligence, unvibrating means unconscious. Okay? No motion, consciousness. Begins with the motion, consciousness, thinking. See? The psychological words I said. Realize, think, perceive. The infinite intelligence, ocean, when thinking, when in motion. So I say, these are metaphors clear and simple. Okay, so we gotta beware of that temptation. Now, number two, there is a reason there can't be two things in reality. I'm not just saying don't do it because you'll hurt my feelings and I had a really great idea and then you're messing it up. It's because it absolutely cannot happen. Because the reality that produces the illusion precedes the lenses of duality. Hence cannot be divided. It's a cognitive distortion. Well, of course they don't have this model, so it doesn't seem like a cognitive distortion at all. Well, in this, I think that it would be obvious. So God or truth is indivisible. Hence, do not attempt to break it in half. This again, as we have said over and over, is reading the effect into the cause. Because the effect is dualities. Trying to put it into the cause of those dualities, some dualities. Okay, 3. This is so big. This is so big. This misunderstanding, the number 3, is so big. It has been a bugaboo in mysticism or attempts at sort of false, sort of amateur mysticism for a long, long time. Real mystics don't have this problem, by the way. They all get the oneness thing. But avoid applying truths of how things are in reality, which you read in God Speaks or you contemplate, to how they are in phenomena. For instance, to say space and time do not exist, be sure to realize that they do exist in phenomena. This is the same thing with cause and effect. Just because this, okay, they do. And when somebody acts so cocky and he's not God realized and he says, be here now, like I am in the now, he's pretending, he's just pretending. Then he wrote a later book called Still Here when he was older. Okay, when we say not to hypostatize abstractions like evil or space, remember I said that when I was explaining hypostatization, a really good example, and Baba refers to it in the discourses, is we tend to think of it's like a force, but it's really an abstraction, but it still exists. There really is good and bad, and Baba talks about it all the time. So anyway, and this is just an continuing the first point. When we say not to hypostatize abstractions like evil or space into actual things independent of experience, we do not mean to deny they are active dynamics within phenomena. They are, and we must recognize them and respond appropriately to them so long as we are still an illusion. So we got to get this parsed right. because you're going to get woo. That's where you get your woo-woo. That's where you get your nonsense, pseudo-mystical talk. And this misunderstanding has been the cause of so much nonsense talk, and was the culprit behind the confusion of absolute idealism that caused the backlash of materialism at the beginning of the 20th century. They were so frustrated with them saying, well, 1 + 1 isn't really 2. And yes, it is in the phenomenal world. They had no way to make that distinction. So they were making claims like it's all one. Parmenides, not necessarily Parmenides, but his disciple Zeno in Greece, for those who know about him, he had the Zeno's paradox where the arrow never really leaves the bow because he had some crazy argument because of the oneness. No, it really leaves the bow in phenomena. They kind of mix these up. Sorry to be looking at you so much, Anne, but you have this look of intelligence today. All right. As well as much New Age writing today. Basically, New Age writing is completely replete with it. That's basically all it is the confusion over these. So they're kind of right, but they don't get the sense in which it's right. So beware the new physics. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss, Pete Townsend. Won't be fooled again. What do multiverses explain? Someone was telling me about multiverses. What do they explain? See, that's why you have a theory. A theory is because there's a phenomenon, and then you needed to explain it, so then you hypothesize something. Well, what does it explain? Now, I actually could tell you what it was posited to explain, but it doesn't explain. And it doesn't take too much time to go into it. The only thing that the way it does is through magical thinking, just as with all other mythemes. Mythemes are made up stuff that become sort of part of the culture, sort of like memes, but they're cultural. So, what does space-time explain? I don't think that's true about memes, forget that. Strike. I explained mythemes earlier. What does space-time explain? Not gravity. General relativity requires gravity as a precondition. There is a writer who speaks, or writes, of space moving through space. Okay? That's very painful for me. Because what does that mean? It sounds real deep. No, actually, it doesn't really sound very deep at all. But he conceives of space as a stuff, and he has 2 of them. Okay, this is quantum. Okay, this is how they talk. They're completely lost their mind. I mean, they've completely gotten divorced from reality. So totally untestable, wild conjectures. It's sort of like the end, there's this sort of wild blowout festival of unrestrained hypostases. You might as well have time moving through time. Fascinating. So beware. Now beware of subjectivism and relativism. This has been the pitfall of the idealists of the past. This is a little like an idealism, but it's not idealism of anything we've ever seen before. Idealism is the idea it's in your head. And there's no matter, but it's in your head. That's called solipsism, the idea that you alone exist and everybody's just sort of figment of your imagination, and you go to a psychiatrist, you're telling him that he's in your head. It's funny. There's been movies about it. So beware of solipsism, the idea that everything's in your personal mind. Baba refers to the objective in the discourses again and again. I'm going to read this full quote. The mental processes are partly dependent upon the immediately given objective situation and partly dependent upon the functioning of accumulated sanskaras or impressions of previous experiences. How could you use that's a lot of words to get across that he means objective. The immediately given objective situation. And I counted, there's like 20 references to objective experience, objective things, objective world in the discourses. 20 references. Well, there's one use of the word objective, and it means the person's subjective, different sense. Okay. Good and bad. I think I already mentioned this, but I just go over it. Beware the modern perversion of the true meaning of going beyond good and evil. All right, so very easy. God is beyond all else. He precedes and produces and experiences in imagination, in ignorance. These divisions, which include good and bad. Over here, they're good and bad, okay? In the individuals, we see good and bad. But culturally, we also. Okay. To say you were going to go beyond good and evil, like Nietzsche's talking, you might as well go beyond future and past, or red and blue, as good and evil. Because why pick good and evil as a duality that you've transcended? Why don't you transcend, your butt from your some other part of your body? Okay. And there's two quotes from Baba, one from Beams. It's a mistake to think that evil is an irreducible active force by itself. That's well known. That's established. There's never been a philosopher who thought it was. There are some fundamentalist Christians that think it's a force of itself, but no thinker who's thought it through has ever seen evil as anything but an abstraction of actions that bring suffering to others. Okay. Now the next quote is from Lord Maher. I could have found others. He says, all evil is to be eradicated for good to be established. Bob also talks about from good to God. That's the way, from good to God. I wanted to point out that Baba, when I say in the world, Baba never said there is no evil in the world. He gives an entire section in, was that Beams? Yeah, an entire section to the subject of good and evil. Good and evil is mentioned in the discourses, is good and mentioned in God Speaks. There's not a book written by Baba where the word together, good and evil, don't appear. I checked that, surveyed that. There isn't one. So the idea that Baba doesn't really have good and evil. Yeah, he does, in the phenomenal world. So this is important because that's part of relativism. So we're kind of putting a little emphasis on that. Yeah?
Didn't Baba also say that there is not evil, but it's lesser degrees of love or of good?
Yes, but however, that is most fundamentally true, that there is no time either. So you've heard Baba say there is no time, many times. You've heard Baba say there is no space, okay? But they are still in a phenomenon. Also, the context of that, I looked it up, and it's in the God Man. It was a particular interview, and the person was trying to trick Baba up, and he had trick questions, and he had some background in metaphysics and stuff. And Baba was being really fast, was quick, and the guy was satisfied with the answer. But you look elsewhere, that's not what he says. He says the guy says, is there evil? And the guy said, no, there's just degrees of good. But elsewhere, Baba says, and it's the only time he ever said that. So it has to, big quotes have to, big caveats have to be around who he's talking to, the context, and that he's speaking of, yes, in reality, there is no good and evil. Okay. But if the guide said, is there bad in the world? He would have said, terrible. So many sins in the name of religion. That's a quote by Baba. So many sins in this. So Baba's very aware of good and bad. He wants us to be good. Once you're a must, you can, steal tea or something. But anyway, evolution, okay, this is very important, and luckily I have time. Evolution is an evolution of consciousness, okay? The control mechanism behind evolution is not, as you'll see, the idea comes from the economists of the 19th century, which I'll say in a slide or two. The result of nature fighting over limited resources, okay? That was Darwin's idea. It wasn't really Darwin's idea, it was the idea of the day in Victorian England, 1859. The word evolve actually means from its source in Latin, unfolding or unrolling of a book. Okay? Now that's how Baba means the word evolution. Something concealed is unfolded or manifested. Remember Baba's analogy of the doll. I don't know if you do know it. Okay, well, the idea that he takes a doll and he wraps it up and then until all tight, he calls it a rock, and then he puts the arms down, the head up, and now says, now there's your plant, and then he rolls it over, and there's your dog, and there's your, and there's the human. So it's like we should have all heard of that. For Baba, it is literally an unfolding of latent form. So the idea of the human form, the perfect form, is latent in the original one. It's already there. It just has to unfold. And it unfolds through the evolution of consciousness. Consciousness pushes the unfolding, and the unfolding pushes more consciousness. And Baba's a consciousness factory. And Baba says that evolution is the byproduct. Apparent evolution, the forms that we find around us, that's a byproduct of an actual evolution of perception. That's in Godspeaks. Okay. Now, Darwin was wrong about the mechanism propelling evolution. It's not that Baba is looking at it from a spiritual point of view, but he was looking at it from the material point of view. People who think that don't know about the problems in evolution, in neo-Darwinist evolution, about the DNA and stuff. They just don't know, because they've been listening to those science promoters. Remember the science promoters? Don't look behind the curtain, because we can explain everything. It's not true. In one of the books that I showed at the second talk, it's called Matter and Cosmos. Thomas Nagel says, look at the books by the Christians. Look at the books by the Christians. Look at the negative arguments that they have against the DNA and stuff that they're doing. He says, I don't like the positive part of their argument, the 6-day creationism. He says, I don't buy that for a minute. I don't even believe in God. But he believes that there's something that's conscious, okay? But he doesn't know what it is. It's more like if he heard this, he'd probably be like, well, he's too old. He's at NYU, he's in his 70s, I think. Very famous. He wrote, What's It Like to Be a Bat? What does it feel like to be a bat? He's a real consciousness advocate. He says, look, so anyway, and if anybody is interested, they can contact me and I'll lead them to stuff, but we want to get through this talk. And I'm serious, I will help them to see that, because people don't know. Okay, Baba says that the scientists know all the forms, the worm and the parrot, and they got them in pretty good order. And this is writing in like in the 30s, but they don't know why. And he says, due to consciousness that the body changes. And we all know that, but we still don't get that. The control mechanism of Darwin is wrong. And in regard to the evolutionary process, it is well to remember always that the beginning is a beginning in consciousness, the evolution is an evolution of consciousness, the end, if there be an end, is an end in consciousness. It's from the Awakening. Okay, I said that already, the bottom line. Okay, now this is a very important person, Oswald Spengler. He wrote his famous book, The Decline of the West. First published in German in 1918, then finally in English in 1926. It is a review of history in a new way. It had incredible influence over the 20th century, and upon me and many people. Joseph Campbell, one of his main influences. Francis Brabazon read it. My father read. If you were in the early 20th century and you were an intelligent person, I don't know about if you agree, because you were, but from people have told me, and I've read it. He says that he's a respected historian of history. He's a respected historian and philosopher of history. He wrote this: Darwin himself had remolded the evolution. By the way, economics, go back before Darwin. Remember there was, who's the guy who developed the invisible hand of the economy? Do you know? Okay. Adam Smith. So Adam Smith had the idea of modern economy. He was a philosopher, and he had the idea of the market, and there's the invisible hand of the market. So this explained economics, okay, in terms of a principle of supply and demand, okay? It takes care of itself. It's an invisible hand that regulates the market. That was the idea of Adam Smith. This got adopted, was very, very popular, and this guy Malthus got all excited about it, applying it to factory life and stuff, and who should live and who should die. They had these ideas before Darwin. Darwin picked up his ideas from the economists, especially Malthus, and you can look this up. It's absolutely not controversial. It's fact. They worshipped Adam Smith. He worshipped Malthus. Malthus is the guy who believed, kill the poor people, make room for, because we're going to run out of food by, 1800. The world will be out of food. So, or 1830 or something like that. Malthus has been continually proved wrong for 100 and something years. Okay, so Darwin himself had remolded the evolution ideas of the 18th century according to the Malthusian tendencies of political economy, which he projected on the higher animal world. Malthus had studied the cotton industry in lecture, and already in 1857, Darwin's book came out in 1859, we have the whole system only applied to men instead of to beasts in Buckle's History of English Civilization. In other words, the master moral of the last of the Romantics is derived, strangely perhaps, but very significantly, from that source of all intellectual modernity, the atmosphere of the English factory. So the original theory of evolution is a projection of the economic thinking of the time in which the book was written. Baba says it's not true. And the Christians have shown so much evidence that it's not true. It's just, they just don't want to give it up because they don't want to accept creationism. So they're sort of fighting, to hold on as like a bulwark because there seems to be no other option. Well, in Baba there is an option. It's something that's not 6 days. It happened 6,000 years ago. It's not magical. It's magical, but it's psychological. Now, the future.
You missed a slide.
I did? Thank you. Oh my God. Please. Okay. I'm going to skip. Okay. No, I'm going to film this slide, but I want to skip it because I'm kind of running long for time, I think. Oh, it's only 3:01.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You're okay, Chris.
Okay. Consider the potential objections that we are committing the same error we say others are. Okay? Just want to address these because it's part of those warnings to the future. I want to address these objections because I've thought about them. See, I say that they got mythemes. Well, why can't they say, well, perception is a mytheme. There's no perception. I don't see any. It's an invisible object, theoretical, hypothetical, invisible entity. Well, at first that sounds kind of good. Oh, because that happens all the time. People will fight their whole life and find they're doing the very thing that they're fighting. But it's not true. The argument doesn't work. The argument doesn't work because what we've explained, that perception is neither theoretical nor is it an entity. So we'll take each in turn. If it's neither theoretical nor is it an entity, it cannot be a theoretical entity to explain things. Okay? This is so obvious that it's almost funny to read, but I'm going to do it. As for being theoretical, perception is irrefutable. Nobody came up with the theory of that we're perceiving. That's where we begin. We wake up in the morning, and that's the problem. That's not the theory. As for being an entity, perception is not a phenomenon. An entity is in the likeness of a phenomenon or a phenomenon, so pictured like a thing. It's not a thing at all. And remember I said in the sum of all things, ideas belong there too? It's not an idea. That's not what perception is. Perception is the necessary precondition to have an idea. It's not, and it's not an object. It's the necessary precondition to even be able to perceive an object. So this is just doesn't work. The future. The future is bright. I couldn't find it, but one time I read somewhere Baba said the future is very bright. But I must have remembered the words a little wrong because I couldn't find it. I would have loved to have found it. That would have been such a great slide. But now about the future. Why is this about the future? It's called Baba and the Future. That's the name of these talks. Is this the last talk? What does this have to do with the future? Seems like it should be called the principles of causation or something. What does it have to do with the future? This is what it has to do with the future. The whole idea that I've been presenting is an idea of lenses. It's how you see. It's seeing and ways of seeing. And I said that it was sanskara is left on your mind from a past experience, and then it conditions how you see things. And it doesn't just condition how you see that little squiggle as a fox, but it even conditions how you act because it's a fox. Remember? So it'll make me, okay. So how you see determines how you act. And the CIA knows that. That's why they're always trying to give you false perceptions, to control your actions. They deceive. We're not trying to do that. However, this idea itself is a kind of lens. It's not a lens that, well, it is a lens that I've been walking around with for 20 years, to some extent. It's hard to live in it all the time. You sort of drift back into your lazy self. What's wrong? But over time, if this becomes popular, if Baba becomes popular, well, first of all, I think what I'm saying here will help to make Baba popular. And Baba being popular will make me obsolete. But it still will be a help. Okay? It's something that was needed. It's a necessary precondition. Now, if this idea became the idea of the land, it's like a collective lens that we all stand around staring through. And it colors our world in a whole new way. We see the whole world anew, all of humanity, through a shared worldview, which is totally, revolutionarily different than the past. We literally see the world differently, and because of how we see the world differently, we behave differently. Now we'll see that Baba says this. Spiritual life is a matter of perception, not a matter of mechanical conformity with rules. See, right now everybody's trying to save the world by making new laws or rewrite the Constitution. If we could just get everybody, right people in jail, it's never worked before. But if you change how people see the world, sorry.
Go back.
I'm trying. Okay. Yeah, next quote. The individual soul has to realize with full consciousness its identity with the universal soul. I don't have my charts anywhere, but man shall reorient life in the light of this ancient truth and will readjust his attitude toward his neighbors in everyday life. To perceive the spiritual values of oneness is to promote real unity and cooperation. Brotherhood then becomes a spontaneous outcome of true perception. Okay? So we're talking about, we're together, we're going to change how we look upon things. Not the way we did in terms of dualities, fundamental dualities, like God creating the world and everything separate and good and evil, and heaven's up here and hell's down there. It's totally different. good people, bad people. There's good and bad in phenomena, but we understand that the soul isn't just, we all okay souls, we're all one soul. Okay. For a man to have a glimpse of lasting happiness, he has first to realize that God, being in all, knows all, that God alone acts and reacts through all, that God is in the guise of countless animate and inanimate entities, which you see around the frame, experiences the innumerable varied phenomena of suffering and happiness. It's from the Final Declaration, 1954. When I come again after 700 years, the evolution of consciousness will have reached such an apex that materialistic tendencies will be automatically transmuted into spiritual longing, and the feeling of equality and spiritual brotherhood will prevail. This means that opulence and poverty, literacy and illiteracy, jealousy and hatred, which are in full evidence today in their full measure, will then be dissolved through the feeling of oneness of all men. During this short period, my word of words will touch the hearts of all mankind, and spontaneous divine touch will instill in man the feeling of oneness of all fellow beings. Okay? I think we get the idea. And then happiness will reign. Thank you for the opportunity to share my ideas and to share yours. I have a website. Hi.
Yay,
Baba.
Jai Baba.
Thank you.